On behalf of Dr. Jane Thomas and my co-host, myself, Helen Disney of Unblocked, and the NEDS Club, which is the private members club of the Ned Hotel, delighted to welcome you to this evening discussion on blockchain and its impact on banking and finance. And this is part of our Strong Women series. And I'm delighted to say we've got 3 fine examples of very strong women with us who are all experienced in different ways in investing or banking or the financial services world and have a connection to blockchain. So I'm just going to kick it off, first of all, by asking all of our lovely ladies to just introduce themselves. So can I start with you, Sorcha?
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I guess when I was initially invited onto this panel, I just thought this is a reunion from London in March 2020. And my God, what has been happening in the meantime since is colossal. And I'm so looking forward to the stories unfold through this panel from everybody here. But a little introduction to me and who I am and why I'm here, because things have moved on for me as well over the last few months. But I'm an ex-banker with over 10 years experience in corporate, commercial and treasury banking in London. I stumbled into the fintech world in Dublin in 2016 and very quickly leapt down the rabbit holes of blockchain infrastructure. My focus has been on supporting SMEs to access innovative funding in the UK and Ireland, plugging the funding gap from the last recession, though I began to see a bigger gap unfold, and that was the technology divide. Watching the growth of global blockchain consortia and considering the impact potential for SMEs and their supply chain who had no ERP technology or CRM or supply chain management systems, I decided that I needed to take action to see where was my role in this and what could I do. I founded the SME Chain in July 2019 to research, learn, consult, and explore project solutions for digitization, sustainability, and sustainable digitization infrastructure, specifically for SMEs. In COVID world, I'm also supporting our 40-year-old family business that we've had to pivot 6 times in the last 6 weeks in an effort to stay open for business in any capacity. And I've also established a social enterprise spin-off that showcases only other social enterprise brands and smallholder farmers, smallholder producers to our local community. So I've become B2C, business to community, in a matter of a couple of months. And from a blockchain perspective, one of our suppliers is Moe Coffee, Moe Coffee Ireland, which is a B Corp, another social enterprise whose entire supply chain is built on blockchain. So I'm going to be here from the SME perspective today.
Thanks, Sorcha. And you're just going to prove what I said, is that we've got strong and resilient women in this group who have multiple roles, multiple entrepreneurial interests, really able to pivot and support people this really difficult time. I mean, supply chains have been hugely disrupted. We've had, as you say, businesses having to pivot multiple times, and I'm sure the SMEs need your help more than ever. And great to hear a shout out for Moe Coffee as well. They were at our blockchain supply chain event at the end of last year and did a fantastic job in our startup showcase. So it's really great to hear they're still going strong. Love to hear from you next, Victoria, if you would unmute yourself and just do a quick intro.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that, Helen. So I'm Victoria Thompson. I'm a tech lawyer by background. I've spent the last 15 years of my life inside financial institutions, supporting their tech ops and innovation strategies and helping them transform and digitize. That journey started really when I went on secondment to Barclays back in sort of 2010, just after the financial crisis, and thinking all about digital transformation there. Then it took me on a journey to the Middle East and eventually out to Singapore, where I worked for the Development Bank of Singapore, and I headed up their tech ops and innovation legal stream and was part of their fintech development strategy. And I came back to the UK just over 2 years ago and went back to Barclays and again was head of their innovation legal stream. And up until recently, I was still with them when I actually broke free and set up ForAid, which is about developing an impact banking platform service, because I really do believe that emerging tech such as blockchain can really deliver a different type of financial service. Through that time that I spent both at Barclays and DBS, I got to do lots of pilots. I got to do lots of experiments in this space. And with all of that knowledge, I think really now is the time for this to go mainstream and for it to actually be used and look at solving problems like transparency and traceability, and how you can develop programmable money that can really make a difference and be used in a way that can really tackle some of the hardest problems that we've got to deal with in our society. And as COVID and the pandemic has highlighted, there's a lot of problems that we need to solve. So yeah, that's what 4AID is all about. It's about tech for good and banking for good.
Well, congratulations on breaking free. I think it's always really exciting when people decide to follow their passion, and I'm sure it's going to be a great success. And I'm going to come back to you about going mainstream, because that's a phrase that's been sort of used time and again when it comes to blockchain in banking and finance, and in regards to Bitcoin. So I want to dig into whether we've really gone mainstream yet or not, and if not, what kind of going mainstream means and how long it's going to take us. But before we do that, I just want to finally introduce Veronica Mihai, who's here with us as well.
Hi, Helen. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And Helen, thank you so much. I think we know each other for quite a while now. You really, really nailed my last name. Thank you for that. So I'm Veronica Mihai, and I don't have an impressive background, I would say. I'm more of an investor. I was one of the co-founders of a fund as well, cryptocurrency fund, that went for a while okay, but now is kind of taking a different path. And I, what was the phrase, broke free from that, and just exploring, consolidating portfolio, exploring new avenues, and kind of trying to decide what I'm doing in this space coming forward, because in the past 5 years or so, I've kind of tried everything from ICOs to mining to investing to anything that came through, and now decentralized finance. So there you go. Every step of the way, and every innovation and anything that happens, I will try it out. So that's pretty much my role in this space.
Well, you're always too humble, because actually the investor is key, because if we don't have investment, none of these projects get off the ground. So far from it, you're at the center of a lot of these things. And also, I think, being able to understand and convey these things in a way that makes sense both to the investor world and to the non-investor world, because it's not always easy for people to understand all the facets of this. So, communication is half of the battle. And I guess I want to kind of take us back now sort of to, the beginning of all of this, which is that, when Bitcoin came about, and this is a story that all of us know, but maybe some people listening in won't know, the origins really was, a lack of trust in the failings of the banking system, a desire to create something which would be different and which would be more trustworthy and not reliant on central control. And obviously, since then, it's not just Bitcoin anymore. There are solutions built for enterprises using blockchain or distributed ledger technology, which can just potentially help us to maybe get rid of some admin and back office processes in banking. And then there's a much more sophisticated world of decentralized finance, which you referred to, Veronica, which we're seeing essentially a whole alternative sort of, if you like, sort of shadow banking system, or, a sort of side arm of banking, which is not done in the traditional way, where all the sort of possibilities of that world are being replicated in a decentralized way, but with additional benefits, and everything being automated by computers, and essentially the computers are now the banks. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is a sort of long-winded introduction to say, the beginning promise of Bitcoin was, be your own bank, get rid of banks, and, everything is going to be about a decentralized world of finance. And I want to kind of ask people, the big picture question is, how far do you think we've got down that road? So maybe you can start with that one, Veronica. How far do you think we've got? Have we actually disintermediated anything?
I think that right now Bitcoin is more of a store of value. If I look at it, most people are using it for that. In terms of have we made an impact or not? Have we changed some things or not? Relatively, but then you look at some of the crypto institutions who actually got banking license and all sorts of news like that, and then you kind of wonder, are we really? Is it about we actually replacing these centralized systems, or are we actually just improving them mean, in the sense that we are recreating them, but maybe working slightly more efficient in a more efficient manner, and so on. I guess that sometimes that was also triggered by the fact that, when the whole crypto world exploded and you had a lot of ICOs and you had a lot of trading happening and so on, there were obviously risks associated with that. And people tended to, especially investors, tended to not favor those solutions. So they started asking for what they knew, which was, well, do you have a license? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you follow that regulation, this regulation, and so on? So obviously, sometimes businesses were also forced to kind of go towards that route. If I look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin is still where it was, in the sense that it's still a peer-to-peer, mechanism of transferring value. You can still do that. Whether people choose to do it or not, that's the part that it's not there yet. And that's why I mentioned that it's more used as a store of value. But do we see movement towards Bitcoin? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you see Coinbase started a trend with the card, with this, with that. Then you had Revolut, who was actually, giving you a way into buying crypto. Then you have PayPal, who is allowing you to buy crypto, to buy BTC. And then you have Square and all of these other companies that slowly are getting into it. Are we still there from changing the world? I don't think so. I think that we are still quite a way to go. We still have a long way ahead of us. But you know how it is. You may not win every battle, but eventually you might win the war in the long term.
Yeah, and I think, obviously Rome wasn't built in a day, and many of these technologies are still at a really early stage. And as you say, Bitcoin has come a long way from, the initial transaction to buy a pizza, which people still celebrate now, through to, this week we've had Bitcoin, I think, making its best gain for 2 years, getting back to close to its highest point from a year ago, where it was about $20,000, and we're just sort of reaching up to that point. And obviously, every time that price,
it held quite well, if you think about it, because last time when it reached almost $20,000, it was there for a short time. But now we can see the last several days it keeps going from 19,000, 18,000, 19,000, and keeps going. So it's holding for a while at least.
I'm wearing out my fingers, touching my phone every half an hour to see what's happening. But apart from that problem, I think we see that Bitcoin is becoming more mainstream, in the sense that if you just look at the numbers of people having a Bitcoin wallet, or the number of more sophisticated investors that are investing in these types of assets, that has changed. I guess that the related question, and I want to ask this maybe both to Victoria and Sorcha with their banking backgrounds, is what about enterprise blockchain? Because we had this promise it was going to sort out cross-border payments and interbank settlements, and it was going to get rid of SWIFT, and it was going to do all these things within banking. Has that really kind of happened? Have we sort of chipped away at the kind of inefficiencies of the traditional centralized banking world? Maybe Victoria, you can go first on that one, since you've now left Barclays and you can speak freely.
I think I would say, it always sticks into my head. There's always the reference of the kind of the Martin Luther King quote of, that's always thrown at people when they talk inside transformational change. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. And if you can't walk, then you crawl. I think we've been crawling for a long time with blockchain. We are almost standing up to begin to start to walk. I think that's definitely where we still are. There's been 2017, when I think back to the flurry of every time I opened my inbox when I was still in Singapore, everything that came across my desk was, this is a blockchain use case pilot. Can you look at this POC? We're doing this, this is this. And every time I was the annoying lady sat at the end of the table saying, really? Do we really need to do this? Is this the best use case? And I think where we've got to now, we've whittled out all of that noise. And now we're finally getting to a point where we're actually seriously talking about real use cases and actually getting sensible business cases that's put forward in a coherent manner. It's not just something that's clearly been pulled off a McKinsey sort of annual report about the top 5 trends in financial services. It's actually somebody seriously done the DD and said, we spend this on X right now, and this is what we could save over a 5-year period. This is, and you've got that level now, because there's been part of that journey of experimentation and testing, but also you've had a maturity in the tech and how it sells itself. So you're now getting to a point where institutions can take this seriously. So I am hopeful that we are now entering a more fertile phase of kind of implementation and growth around that. You see that now, the amount of coverage and research that's coming out of the Bank of Institutional Settlements, the whole CBDC dialogue that is now happening, which has been massively escalated by Facebook throwing in the Libra grenade into all of this that they did. But I think that's still where we are. We're not quite ready to go full implementation, but it's starting to come.
And if there had been central bank digital currency, pre-COVID, how much difference do you think it would have made to things like some of the kind of business payments and so on?
I think it would have made a massive difference. I mean, fundamentally, the millions, let's be honest, the millions of people that have been excluded from any sort of government support or access to financial support or the distribution of grants and aids would have been transformed. I mean, ultimately, it is that personal experience of looking at aid and grants that led me to ForAid in the first place. That's why I got a UKRI grant, because I specifically said, I think blockchain can do a better job. And that's why they've given me a grant to go out and try and experiment in that space, because I think we can use this technology, and governments can use it. So in these types of circumstances, when you need to distribute money fast, quick, want to know where it's gone, what's happened, this technology can help with that. It's not the panacea for everything. And I think we are now accepting that. And we're now more focused on what we can do with it. And it's at a grade of enterprise level technology. You're getting international standards, you're getting things and really established technical working groups now that have been working for a good few years. And I think that's what's going to make the difference. I still think we are 5 to maybe 10 years away where we don't talk about this anymore and we just talk about what we're doing, because that's where we ultimately want to be. I don't sit there and talk about my ISP address. I don't sit there and talk about all of the stuff that goes on behind my email. I just send an email, and that's where we want to be ultimately.
Yeah, and I think, to add to that, the sort of level of entrepreneurs and experienced business people that are coming in compared to when I first got involved in the kind of Bitcoin blockchain world, you'd get very young people with very sort of dreamy ideas, and, they're great and nothing wrong with that, but there weren't the level of people with real kind of industry experience who were then taking that and applying blockchain to the problems. And I think that has, for me, has been quite a big change.
You really see these use cases now. When you look at Italy, people don't talk about it very much, but a large amount of the financial services in Italy is running on an R3 backbone.
Yeah.
There are pockets of this, and in certain countries and jurisdictions that are more advanced than others. And that's what you're going to see. And I truly believe, I mean, from my time in Asia and when you look at other countries as well in emerging economies, there is great opportunity to do the leapfrog step and to really go beyond a lot of the headaches that a large amount of financial institutions in the West have got to deal with, because they are stuck on legacy stacks that are just hugely expensive, huge amounts of technical debt, and therefore completely suffocate it of any innovation. Yeah. And when you actually let go of that legacy and see where this new emerging technology can go, combined with cloud and various other emerging stacks in AI, then it can get really clever really fast. But
yeah.
I think the hashtag for this event should be "Let go of the legacy."
But it's
just let go.
But it's that. I think for me, the biggest barrier that we've still not overcome for this type of technology is the cultural shift, the mindset that needs to come with the adoption. And having organizations that can deal with that in a regulated industry is really, really hard. So I think that is going to come, and there is going to be a need now, a very pressing need, because of the economic crisis and the debt levels that we're going to have as a result of COVID, that the demand for operational efficiency will push enterprise level tech really at the door. Because if you want to start now to look at saving, this is going to be something that people will revisit.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? That maybe it's not actually about having, good explanations of blockchain or all these things. It's just that we have no room for complacency anymore. And so people will actually break out and say, I've got to find a solution. And, oh God, all those people have been talking to me about blockchain all these years. Maybe I should actually look at that now, and take it seriously. So, sometimes this crisis period can actually be a push.
You look back in history, and economic crises have always spurred on innovation. They've always pushed people to think creatively and to do the proverbial out of the box. And that's what this could do. I mean, the level of debt we've got in the UK as a result of COVID is insane. The amount of borrowing that our government has done is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, watching the budget today was a very depressing experience for anyone who knows anything about economics. It was quite scary.
And Europe's at 90 billion in terms of what it's lending out to support the COVID packages in each of the individual countries, and Ireland just got added to that for 2.5 billion today. So the debt levels are going to continue to increase. It's just how the debt is structured.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting listening to the different reports, and Gartner versus Boston Consulting versus Bank of International Settlements. And I was like, I spent 2 months reading at the beginning of COVID. I sat down and I went through all of the policy, every single paper that I could find on SMEs, fintech, SMEs, lending, I read through. And it makes me think about the Boston Consulting Group paper that said in 2010 that the cloud was the infrastructure that every bank needed to invest in then, 10 years ago. And yet in 2020, we're still hearing about UK and Irish banks who are not even in year one of their cloud migration projects. So when you're thinking about the 5 to 10 year cycle of, and that Gartner hype cycle of where are we in terms of the actual implementation of blockchain in the financial institutions, it's crazy. The legacy systems are just going to take an awful lot longer to unpack. But if you think about what has been delivered through COVID, and that's what I continue to focus on, and the two banks that have been in the focus of my mind anyway have been Ant Financial in its recent IPO and the success and the failure of its mission and vision, and what is next to come, who knows. And then Avanti Bank, Avanti Financial with Caitlin Long, who has been one small player for such a long time, waving the Bitcoin and the blockchain flag from Wyoming, and people going, well, who's ever going to listen to that? And look what was achieved, a unanimous vote this year. So more power to you, Caitlin Long. We're following in your footsteps. I'm not going to form a bank, but I'd certainly love to be involved in the digital assets and the products that are going to evolve from this. That's just one small step for womankind as well.
And she's done such hard work getting legislators on board and even getting people to actually use cryptocurrency to get them to understand it. I think getting
the language and the mission statement. If you look at the website for Avanti Financial and their paragraph about us, the commitment of who they are and what they're going to deliver and when, and with no masqueraded emotional manipulation that you find from the banking PR spins. And this is what we've been used to for the past decade of the banks covering up the awful mess they've left behind and continue to drive through our society. Because they're not up for the game. They're not up for it. But then looking back at Ant Financial and what it's been doing, like I've been talking about Ant Financial all summer at every event that I've been going on because of what they have had committed to for SMEs. And that was bringing 1 million SMEs, and bear in mind, they've got 100 million, I don't know what the number of SMEs is, but 1 million SMEs onto the blockchain onto their proprietary blockchain within 3 years at a cost of $14 per month, a modifiable blockchain, or a modifiable like ERP system and its capabilities and what it can do for an SME, you know. And it started to make me think, well, what is Europe offering? What is America offering? China is just coming up again and again with the Facebook of, you know, this ERP system is the Libra for SMEs, that they need to allow them to be included in financial systems. Because I know this all too well, you know, being back on the ground in a micro business in a rural economy, very rural economy, the lack of digitization that exists here is phenomenal, and that is everywhere now. And just by getting a point of sale system and by selling online, or by having a social media account, that's digitization for SMEs. So where are we starting from a banking perspective in terms of including all of these hundreds of thousands of SMEs in Ireland, you know, 1 million plus 5 million SMEs in the UK? So we have to go back to think, who are we building for and how do we include them in this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a scary statistic that one of the PwC reports came out with, that 50% of the world's banks haven't actually done any digital transformation.
I think there was 89% and this was just the last few weeks, 89% of European banks, and I don't know if that still includes the UK, but 89% of European banks have upped their digital game because of COVID.
Yeah.
So
but then you follow up that stat that PwC have with their report, then they have the really scary one that actually of those digital transformation journeys, only 2% are considered successful. So there's something very wrong in the cultural operations for change, IT and transformations, for it actually delivering on its results. And I mean, as an IT lawyer, I mean, I grew up as a junior lawyer working on massive digital transformation projects, and we always sat there quite happy as lawyers, knowing how unsuccessful they might be and watching the same war stories happen, because for lawyers it was a gold mine. It was fantastic. We do our lovely master services agreement, we do all of our outsourcings, we do all of this where it was all pushed out into the private sector, knowing full well everybody would lose sight of who their customer is, what the actual requirements would be, how they would benefit, how the parties would work together and deal with this process that they were going to go through, which is ultimately like a marriage when you get into these complex IT projects. And yeah, we'd be sat there always going back to our lovely documents and our things. And that's where I get really excited as a lawyer as well, when you think about when you move into what DeFi could be, where you then get smart contracts and you get this whole really crazy world of autonomous things happening. That is super exciting for me as a techie lawyer. I get really excited about that. You can tell by my hand gestures, but this is where I think then the next kind of like forefront of innovation is going to be, and what that will then mean for professional services people like me. What do we look like as a legal industry? What do we look like as an accountancy industry? What does the rule of law and law as tech and all of that sort of stuff, what does that mean? Because then when you merge together the complexity of financial instruments and that complexity of technology and operation, then that's a real head scratcher for people to get their minds around, and what that will, and so that's why it's really interesting to observe now what's happening with DeFi and what's going to happen in that space.
Yeah, I mean, you actually brought me really nicely onto my next question, so thank you, Victoria. It's almost like we'd curated that as danced out in advance. But I was reading a piece by Lawrence Wintermeyer today from Global Digital Finance, and he was saying, you know, because of the sort of transformation from so-called CFI, centralized finance, to DeFi, decentralized finance, that, you know, changes in investing and banking are sort of moving at warp speed, but in a sort of side track, because, as you just said, you know, glacial progress from inside the traditional banking system, but outside of that, You've got decentralized systems where people are doing things like yield farming, which is a term probably most people are not really familiar with, but, people can make, 3-digit returns. And there's been this kind of mini boom in DeFi during the COVID period. And, you've got negative or zero interest rates, and you've got the kind of really difficult to predict kind of global marketplace. So isn't this kind of a fantastic opportunity for investors who are willing to take on more risk to still, make money? But clearly something that's quite terrifying from a regulatory and legal point of view, because there are so many unanswered questions about what happens when things go wrong. Maybe Veronica, you can talk a little bit about the DeFi space, because it must be quite interesting for somebody with your background, come from a background in hedge funds and investing and so on. What's your thoughts on DeFi? Do you think it's sort of just the new kind of Wild West, or is it a real kind of growing serious phenomenon?
I think it's a bit of both at the moment. If you look at the headlines, you would say it's a Wild West. But then again, you do have companies there and innovators that are quite serious about it. And ultimately, okay, so what does DeFi do, if you think? Well, and I stand corrected by the ladies if I get it wrong, but from my humble knowledge, banks usually make money mainly from their other services, not from account holders. So that means borrowing and loans and the sorts. So actually, DeFi, what it does, it provides exactly that, a decentralized finance. It's a decentralized manner of providing loans, borrowing, staking, some sort of reward to the user for putting capital into that system. So yield farming and so on. If I would try to explain yield farming in a very, very simple way, I would say when you put your money in a savings account, you are promised and you are given usually an interest, right, for that a certain percentage of interest for that money that you are keeping in the bank, with the bank. And you have restrictions sometimes on when you can take the money out, for how long you can keep it there, or you should keep it there, and so on and so forth. In DeFi, it's pretty similar, because you put your money into the system, you stake it as such, and you get interest rates for that. So practically you, as they say, well, you make the money work for you. And yes, if you compare to traditional banking right now, in DeFi space, users can earn somewhere, anywhere between 7 to 10% on their investments. So all of a sudden you can look at this and you say, oh, this is an alternative way of making money. Have there been some scandals and some, let's say, poor conduct from some of the projects or some of the founders of projects in DeFi space? It's when something is new, there will be some good actors, some bad actors, and and ultimately we have to look at those who are forging ahead and trying to make things and innovate in that space and actually perform in an ethical manner, if you wish. In terms of legislation and that spectrum of things, I guess, you know how it is, because regulators haven't caught the wind yet of this. That's how I feel sometimes. I think
really most regulators have no idea that DeFi even exists, if I'm quite honest.
Yes.
So it's probably good for the people that want to make 3-digit returns on yield farming, but basically no policymakers have even woken up to the fact that there's a word,
yes,
DeFi.
DeFi, exactly. So sometimes I suppose these ecosystems sometimes tend to regulate themselves, simply because if you want to run a business on that space, eventually you would have to perform better in the sense, not only in how you conduct your business and what kind of returns you give, but also how you operate and what do you offer to your users, what's reliability and so on and so forth. But then and although it might seem like a drop in the ocean compared to traditional finance, this year DeFi did break over $1 billion in capital in investments. So that sounds, I would say, promising in the sense that it's growing, that people are catching up to this trend and they're trying to understand it, and and I'm not gonna go into which project is better than which and so on and so forth, because it's not really useful for this conversation. But I think for platforms that actually give you, unlike traditional banks, removes the layers of intermediaries and gives you access to good returns and so on, it's an opportunity, ultimately. How it will evolve, will it help? I would like to see something like this, used in more remote spaces or places. And maybe this will level the playing field for people, in terms of access to financing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a sort of follow-up question is, are we comparing, like for like, in the sense that probably we're not going to get rid of the traditional banking system. We're hopefully going to make it more efficient, but
they will have to compete.
DeFi will have its benefits, as you say, for perhaps people who aren't able to access traditional finance, or those that want to play in a more high-risk environment. There'll be lots of strengths to a DeFi ecosystem, which could probably never should be replicated in a traditional centralized banking system.
No.
SME lending is a really big space for DeFi, and it's one of the reasons why I decided to commit and leave fintech and leave the consultancy that I was doing to move into the blockchain infrastructure side, and particularly where it was evolving for decentralized finance and invoice receivables trading. If we think about that, back in 2010, when it was starting to evolve and it was a big risk asset class evolving, and institutional investors were finding it really difficult to understand it, to trust it, and to price it. And often it was the SMEs, of course, that were bearing the brunt of the cost. And you were seeing 14 to 28% for a receivable traded. And that was the cost of finance. But there was no way that a bank was going to give the money. So there wasn't really a choice for the SME. I know I'm taking it out of the direct institutional investor space and bringing in the middleman of the fintech or the middlewoman. But the price sticks in my head of 8%, because we're now at 8% is a good rate for an SME to receive from a fintech for receivables trading in order to access liquidity and cash flow. So there's similarities in terms of timelines and that trust across the institutional markets as to where they're deploying their funds, because it was pension funds, it was private equity, it was venture capital, and other institutional investors that were and still are funding that DeFi. So it's an interesting space. But the credit score part is one point, and I'm probably taking the conversation away a little bit, but it's such an important element of what we should be looking at, when we're on the debt side and we're analyzing for credit risk, that we're not constantly looking at just one figure of past performance. Because how do we look into the future? How do we analyze for future performance when there's no cash flow, when there's no projections? You can't actually appreciate for that at the moment. And this is where we start to look at other innovative scores that exist out there. And one score is innovative assessments, which is actually a psychometric testing that analyzes the character of the individual through psychometric testing, or the debtor, as well as their past performance and future opportunity. And to bring this then to another level of when we're looking at corporations and their credit score and indeed their performance score, why are we just looking at the credit and financial side when we should be looking at their behaviors? And this is where, again, blockchain has this capability to completely change the programmability of what we're looking at and why, and how can we access untampered, trustworthy information about an organization in a real-time capacity. And there's an organization called Deadline, and I don't know if Hugh is on the line here. Hugh, ask a question if you're there. But they've got an algorithm that can calculate the 2030 Paris Agreement score of an organization based on its financial statements today. So when they're going to achieve this or when they're not. And why aren't we looking at that score in addition to a financial score? And this also applies to small, medium businesses, because if we're constantly looking at credit score as to the credit worthy, I hate that word, of an individual or organization, and from an investor perspective, there has to be more to it. It's the character, it's their performance in sustainability and their purpose-driven activities and contributions.
So
Yeah.
would you say it's a move towards more conscious capitalism?
Conscious capitalism. Barbara, if you're on the line, that's your phrase, Barbara Hankin, conscious capitalism.
I mean, to share a little bit, like with Foraid, one of our projects that we're potentially looking at specifically in Africa, where you have in some geographies there, Eswatini being one, you have a huge amount of women who are entrepreneurs who are not even underbanked, they're just not banked. They're not even paid in cash, they're quite often paid in kind. They therefore can't scale their businesses, they can't access capital, they have no score whatsoever on any scale. And this is a huge problem in emerging economies when you look at women, particularly women entrepreneurs. The same type of data comes out of the Caribbean and Latin America as well, with female entrepreneurs there. There's a real need to think about this, and DeFi could really solve this. And what's really interesting about DeFi, and I have to declare an interest, I've been working with DIA and what they've been doing in this space, and thinking about actually how you have data as an instrument, and actually therefore you can make this type of play possible, because if this information can get onto the blockchain and you can share it in an open way and you can manage the integrity around that data, then these types of assessments become much easier for people. Access to data is critical to be able to start to make these decisions. And invoice financing, the old problem that always came on, well, is this a real invoice? Is this a duplicate invoice? Is this a fraud? Is this... And that was always the thing that was presented whenever we looked at any of these use cases. How do we know that this is this and that is that? So that actually, the more adoption we get and the more we get into the information being available through these means, can enable this type of innovation and adoption to happen.
Well, these comments are one of the reasons I'm so glad that we have a program called Strong Women, because you've raised, a number of different points which I think are really relevant to the bigger topic. Because I don't think that we should measure whether we've succeeded in reforming banking and finance via, have we changed back office processes in large institutions? I think it should be about, groundswell of change and, grassroots change. And, you mentioned, Sorcha, financing for small businesses, which is obviously a huge priority right now with the economic crisis we're going through. We also talked about green finance, and that's becoming this, much bigger political priority, about how we actually finance things and what we want to finance and what we want to incentivize. Do we want to incentivize pollution, or do we want to incentivize, new technologies which can help the environment and help the sustainability? And female entrepreneurs as well is another. I was teaching about this just a few days ago on a webinar about what blockchain can do for women. And as you say, the traditional systems of finance tend to have been geared to the usual suspects. There's a lot of bias in the system, not just on gender bias, but racial bias and other forms of bias. And blockchain potentially allows us to get finance to entrepreneurs all over the world who may never have had that opportunity. There may be very different types of people from the people that would have traditionally received venture capital finance in the past, or angel investment, or some kind of token-based finance that we'll launch with a blockchain. And so this is really, really changing our whole definition of banking and finance. And if it hasn't yet kind of permeated into the sort of back office functions of a bank, I don't think that's necessarily the measure that we should take for whether we've succeeded in making change. And I think those changes are starting to happen. I know of entrepreneurs in parts of Africa who've got trade finance through blockchain-based solutions who never would have had funding if it wasn't for blockchain. So, we have to kind of measure those things as well as all the other things that people might more traditionally associate with this topic.
And the measurement is so important because it's very difficult to get credible information that's unbiased out there. And there has been an industry created around cherry picking specific information that businesses are built on because of that so-called reliable data. And Findexable is an absolute ambassador for this mission in terms of looking at markets and from a fintech perspective in a very holistic way. And one of the initiatives that they have at the moment is the Gender Diversity Index. That is its sole purpose is identifying and honoring those who are truly diverse and implementing change through that diversity. Because if you look at the two banks I mentioned earlier that have been making waves this year, Avanti and Ant Financial, have a look at the board of directors. Avanti Bank has one female out of about a dozen who is the chief marketing officer. And in Avanti Bank, we have Caitlin Long, who has been leading this for years. So it makes a difference as to how you get a unanimous vote like Avanti Bank. I know it's not going for IPO, but it's getting a banking license, and hey, that's a hard mission. But then and Victoria knows all about this at the moment. And then you separately got going for an IPO, a board of directors that is same. So where's the diversity of thought, and how does that fit into a more diverse thinking future, and where is the purpose driven for that organization? So goal number 5, SDGs, equality. We get that right, all the other goals fall into place.
Yeah, I mean, we've had countless reports that say if we just banked women and we stopped just completely preventing them from accessing the financial system, we would have enough money to deal with the problems that we've got to deal with. There is still terrible levels of exclusion that happens with women in financial services, and it should be something that is talked about more. And despite all the initiatives that are there from the IMF, the World Bank, pick whichever institution you want, there will be a stream about it. But actually, if people really wanted to do something about it, it's not that hard. So you've got to ask yourself, why is that not happening? And then we start to address the cultural issues and ask the hard questions of those institutions of why, because I think there is that needs to be put out onto the table and really ask those questions.
I suppose it also goes down to the fact that, it boils down to the fact that, we go back to metrics and what questions do we ask and what expectations do we have, and we have certain patterns that we expect everyone to fit through, and if you're not this, then it's not going to happen, and the world is not black. It's not like that. There's a lot of gray out there. It's not just black and white. It's not just if you can't be this, then you're nothing. It's much more complex than that. And then when you look at going back to the metrics and the Sorcha, it's quite interesting, the things that you mentioned, because the current credit score system, how is it going to work when I'm sure that right now there will be, even in this country, there will be so many people with a bad credit score because of the COVID crisis, because people couldn't, keep up with their payments and so on and so forth. And how is that? So are we saying that we're going to stop these people from trying to rebuild their lives? Are we going to stop them from, or are these institutions going to stop them from accessing loans or any kind of finance that they might need in order to, relaunch, if you wish, their life, especially when they've been followed, they have been left without jobs, their businesses have closed down, and it's not yet over.
I think when it comes to bouncing back, that's a huge issue, and Sorcha did touch on it, and I'm glad you reminded me, because I worked recently on this Parafinance hackathon, and it was precisely around that point of, this technology is not just for wealthy people to invest and make 3-digit returns. I mean, that's great, but it's also about helping everybody, and perhaps more so the people at the bottom end of the scale who really are struggling. And this project was about how can we combine a digital wallet with a marketplace that only offers people deals that they can afford to take on, and that matches people up and looks at their credit kind of history and their behavior in a much more nuanced way, not just a sort of blunt instrument of current credit scoring, which says, you know, you once defaulted on a debt, so you can't ever have a mobile phone or repair your boiler or do any of these basic things, but says, you know, maybe you can afford to pay £5 a month, and that's what we're going to show you the deals for, you know. So that kind of ability to program the money and to give people also the control over the wallet, so that they're not just having payments coming out willy-nilly and they can't control the timing of the payments. You know, if you're on very, very tight budget, you know, £5 can make the difference, you know, between, you know, having to not eat or having to, you know, not have the lights on or the heating on in the middle of winter. So, you know, people are on very, very, very small margins, and those things are going to be, it's fundamental for.
I think let's be honest. I mean, one of the things that really I was super shocked when I was in Singapore was the level of education about finance. So I had 3 children when I was out in Asia, and when I looked at actually what they got in school about finance, what they got through the media about finance, what they got through having bank accounts there for the kids and things, it was a completely different level to what I think about what I went through and where I am now. And I remember with a friend being sat, what was it? It was 2017. And I'd just done the Oxford Said blockchain strategy course. And I said to my friend, oh, come on, there's this subsidized course that we can go on at the Singapore University of Social Sciences to teach you all about how you invest in cryptocurrencies, how you set up wallets and all this type of stuff. Let's go along. And this was subsidized. If you were Singaporean, you could find out. So Desi, my friend, and I sat next to a group of pensioners who were thinking about how they would start to invest in this, if this was assets that they wanted to play with. This was back in 2017. And during this half a day, we sat there in this university room. It was full of people, very diverse backgrounds, all learning about this. We all sat there took our laptops along, opened up our wallets. We had someone talk through how we would do a transaction, where we would do things and everything. And when you think about the experience of what that was like in 2017 to what it is now, very different.
I remember those wallets. They were bad.
And then thinking about what you do with those very long passwords and all of this type of stuff, and sort of like, it was just insane. But it was the fact that there was this level of financial support and literacy that was happening in that community, that they saw that this was worth investing in. And in Singapore, they have this whole subsidy around the lifelong learning pot that every citizen gets, and you can use it and spend it however you want. But imagine if we had that for people in the UK. Just thinking about that, if it was about educating people about these opportunities, so they then thought about what's the best way to manage their finance, what's the best products for them, like you're saying, what's really affordable for you on your means, then you can have a whole different conversation about finance. And I think it's a real shame that more of that conversation doesn't happen.
Well, I would love to see mainstream teaching of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in schools in the UK. Maybe it will happen one day, but I'm not sure.
Surely you'll be the teacher, Helen.
My course will be legendary, I'm sure.
It will.
All of the 5-year-olds setting up their Bitcoin wallets. It's going to happen. I can see it.
I was actually thinking to go to my daughter's school and ask them if they would be willing to, to kind of let me talk about these kind of things. But
I think there are apps, like Pigsby was an app for children to play with cryptocurrency, yes, I think. So there are things that have been designed specifically for that age group. So it's not completely out of the realms of possibility. But this is not a plug for Pigsby, but just to mention one example of an app that's designed for that. So we've only got a few minutes left, so I just want to kind of ask each of you to give me a minute on what you think is coming up in terms of next steps for blockchain and banking and finance. Is it going to be central bank digital currency? Is it going to be some other innovation, and what are you excited about that you see coming up? So Sorcha, maybe you can take us.
I wanted to hear what everybody else had to say first.
I can see you were deep in thought there, so I thought maybe you were having a really interesting thought.
Look, we've covered so much of what I wanted to say, and I think what I'd love to see, and what I've been harping on about throughout the summer, let alone before that, is we need another credit score. We need another score. The score cannot be based on your credit history and what we think we're going to do as a business, let's say from the SME perspective over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I mean, we've pivoted, I'm thinking from a personal perspective here, we've pivoted a business 6 times in 6 weeks to stay open. And every day you go in thinking, will we be allowed open tomorrow? What about suppliers? Do we get stock in? I don't know if we've got a business next week. And it's that reactionary. So, but what we do is we are sustainably focused, we're purpose focused, and we're inclusive to a community. And I think of all of the SMEs and in every developing world that is a contributor towards society through its day-to-day activities, but is completely invisible because of the setup of the infrastructure. So if we could get that Ant Financial style 1 million SMEs on an inclusive, free infrastructure system that's EU-wide or whatever, that allows you to participate in the system of systems, you know, that plugs you into the economic system, the financial monetary system, and by there you're visible. You know, it creates and also accountable from an SDGs perspective as well, because I know from being on the ground in the community in the last 2 months, how many invisible contributors towards the Sustainable Development Goals there are, and none of them are included. And instead we're failing miserably on achieving those goals as one country. So imagine if we got all of these contributors visible, and they were then accountable for helping the country and the region achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, this is what I would like to see in the next few years. And where does fintech fit into this? Well, first of all, the financial institutions need to be accountable. They need to put their money where their mouth is. And the banking of the greening of the financial system report in the last few months, that actually May 2020, that stated only 39% of banks were analysing for sustainability and climate risk. And the result of that is that by the Institute of Shareholder Services, only 3% of 6,500 multinationals in the S&P 500 were achieving any impact in the Sustainable Development Goals, which just shows you that the money system is the gatekeeper, and we need to be more accountable.
And I think blockchain can really help us towards that. We can create the right incentives to push people towards those kind of goals. So I would love to see that. Maybe it's not here yet, but it's a good goal. Victoria.
Give me 2 years, Sorcha, and I'm
with you.
You'll be able.
It's all on your lap now, Victoria.
Netflix
it's on
model.
you. No pressure. No pressure.
I think for me, there's a very different thing for what I think will happen and what I would like to happen. What I would like to happen is that CBDCs become a reality, and that therefore that enables inclusive, accessible, affordable financial services for people, and starts to really be able to do very interesting things around understanding where money goes and what's its impact. I think that is really, really potentially very exciting. But do I think that will happen in the next 5 years? No, I think that's a good 10 years away in mainstream fiat economies, because given, again, the legacy places where we are, and the regulators and institutions that are involved in those ecosystems, that's going to take a long time. I think what you'll see in the short term is you'll start to see more established institutions playing in this space, dipping their toe in. You'll see regulated institutions setting up exchanges. You've already heard the moves that Standard Chartered, DBS, they're all going to start to play in this spaces. It will still be a little bit on the outside, but that's what you're going to see. You'll see more of the whole interbanking ledger, more of that type of sort of stuff happening and moving around and going forward. But I think for me, the big thing that I want to see is exactly what Sorcha has said, is the value of the SME and their role in our economies needs to be looked at very carefully. And we need to do that because of the way our economies stack up. If we don't nudge the SMEs forward, we're leaving behind, in some economies, up to 70 to 80%. And that just doesn't work. We really need to rethink that, how we value them, how we support them, how we supply them with capital for them to continue to grow and keep our local economies alive. And then how we think about how that has to become circular is really, really important, because I mean, it's like Chris Skinner said, it was an amazing quote. I mean, right now we're financing our extinction. Let's be honest, we really are. And so how do we finance our growth in a sustainable way is critical. And I really, truly believe that this technology that we've talked about this evening and the wider set that converge to make it truly powerful of cloud and AI and all of those good stuff, that's where we can start to see real value being delivered to people.
Veronica, last word from you.
Sure. So to be honest with you, I look at this time as although it is a distressing time, but I see it as a push for innovation. And I'm hoping that that is the case. If I look at, there was I think a couple of months ago, their usual annual report from Grayscale that came out, and they said, you know, from 2019 to 2020 to this year, there was quite a spike in interest in Bitcoin, for example, which kind of gives an idea of where people are reading more about it, that people are reading more about alternative ways of financing, alternative ways of doing things, innovation, and so on, questioning the status quo, if you wish. And it's driven by what is happening with the economy, what is happening with the pandemic, and so on. So it rose from like 36% to 55%. It's also, why I mentioned COVID is because actually 63% of those people who were more interested in 2020 were pushed by the COVID situation. So I feel like, oh, and one good news that I'm really excited about is that the number of women investing in Bitcoin has increased, and I'm happy. You know, that's why I like to mentor and I like to, you know, help other women maybe understand it or get into it or even build a career in this space, because I think that's how you build. You push the boundaries. You challenge the current systems, current situations, current climate, everything. And that's how you move towards what Sorcha was mentioning and what Victoria was mentioning, looking at sustainability and equality, diversity, and all the other things that matter, actually, climate change and so on. So I'm excited to see what is going to come, what is going to happen. And I'm usually the eternal optimist, and I feel that things are going into a good, into the right direction with the new emerging technologies such as blockchain and with the new asset class, crypto, and all of that.
Well, I'm glad we've ended on a positive and happy note, and I think it's amazing how this topic, which could be seen as quite dry, blockchain in banking and finance, but actually, it's not a dry subject at all. It's about things that affect all of us, our environment, entrepreneurship, women, helping people on low incomes, helping people in SMEs. So we've really ranged across a broad range of things. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Thanks again to my co-host Jane, who takes turns with me to host these events. This is our last one of the year, so I think we've ended on a high note, and very much thanks to all you ladies for being so well informed and so interesting and having so much desire to change the world. So I'm going to leave it there with a Merry Christmas and a hope for all of this to drive forward in 2021, and obviously a plea for Bitcoin to keep going up.